Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to today's webinar presented by New Frontier Data in partnership with Women Grow. Today we will be taking a look at the current state of diversity within the legal cannabis industry and provide insight into the types of challenges faced by its growing workforce. My name is Gretchen Gailey, EVP of Communications and Government Affairs. I'm sorry, I do know who I am at New Frontier Data, and I will be your moderator. Just a few quick housekeeping items. First, today's event is being recorded and will be made available to you after the webinar. We will send out an email to view the on-demand webinar as soon as it is available. Second, please enter your questions using the GoToWebinar control panel, which is located on your screen. You can start entering any questions you may have now. We will get to as many questions as we can at the end. Now let's take a look at the agenda for today's event. First, we will introduce our speakers and their respective companies, then jump into our main presentation, and finally end with a Q&A. We'll take as many questions as time permits. We want to thank Gia Marone, Director of Communications for Women Grow, for being here with us and for their insight into the diversity report and their thoughts on the industry. Now, before we jump into the meat of our webinar today, we'd like to ask you to answer a quick poll question. Today's poll question is, compared to other industries in which you have worked, is the cannabis industry A, more diverse, B, the same, or C, less diverse? I'll give you a few moments to answer the question. All right, well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. We will reveal the results after we hear from all of our speakers. And please remember, as we are going through the presentation, please send in your questions via GoToMeeting. Now, first, to meet our speakers, we have Giada Aguirre-DeCarcer, founder and CEO of New Frontier Data, who will tell us a bit more about herself and New Frontier. Giada?
Thank you, Gretchen. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be talking about this very interesting topic. Today, we'll be talking about the Diversity in Cannabis report, which is just another breakthrough study in the cannabis industry that we're very, very pleased to be bringing to you in partnership with Women Grow. And very excited to have Gia Marone join us today, who will be speaking shortly. I am Giada Aguirre-DeCarcer. I'm the CEO and founder of New Frontier Data. Now, since 2014, we have endeavored to provide you access to vetted and comprehensive data, meaningful and digestible analytics, and timely business intelligence via not only our reports, but also via our online portal, Aprio, which I encourage you all to visit and learn about. As we say, time is money, and this industry is moving at the speed of light. So we understand the need to save you time by helping you understand what you need to know, when, and why in a cost-effective manner. Well, speaking of speed, it is a tremendously interesting time to be participating in this, in the emergence of one of, well, the fastest growing industries in the US and one of the most complex new markets in modern times, which is the legal cannabis industry. One very critical and interesting socioeconomic factor in this nascent industry, which in this nascent industry is allowing us to track and study from an early stage of the market, is indeed diversity. So this first ever cannabis industry diversity report is intended to serve as an initial study, a benchmark of sorts regarding diversity in an industry at its infancy and taking measure of its effects towards health and growth. This study focuses primarily on gender and ethnic diversity as starting points and will provide a foundation for future studies to dive more deeply into more holistic and comprehensive characteristics as they take root within the industry. I very much look forward to your questions and what I hope is a dynamic and educational conversation. Thank you again for joining us.
All right, thank you, Giada. Next, we go to Gia Marone, Director of Communications for Women Grow. Gia, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Women Grow?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gretchen. Hello, my name is Gia Marone, and I am the Director of Communications for Women Grow. Women Grow is the largest professional network organization in the cannabis space, created to connect, educate, inspire, and empower the next cannabis business leaders in this industry. And being a part of Women Grow has been a wonderful experience, and I must say we are honored to have partnered with such an esteemed organization like yours. It's been a wonderful experience for us. And we thank you for this opportunity to bring this information to market. It's been a collaborative experience in having our market leaders participate and provide feedback. And this is what Women Grow looks to do, is to create strategic partnerships across the industry, bringing groundbreaking information. And I look forward to more. So thank you so much, and we look forward to the findings as we discuss them on this webinar.
All right, thank you, Gia. This now takes us to John Kagia, our Executive Vice President of Industry Analytics at New Frontier Data. John, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I couldn't be more delighted to be helping spark this conversation around diversity and inclusion in the cannabis industry. You know, in my role as EVP of Industry Analytics with New Frontier, I've been leading the team that has been doing much of the research that New Frontier has been publishing over the past few years. And in that time, we've looked at issues ranging from the size and growth of the industry, the trends in consumer demand for products, the medical applications of the plant, even what supplies growers are using to run their cultivation facilities. But as part of understanding where the industry currently is and where it's going, we also think that some of these perhaps social issues are critical to also understand. Because as with cannabis, the rules have not been written. It's an industry that is still very young, whose structures have not been defined, and where both innovation and lack of convention creates opportunities to do things differently than have been done in other sectors. And so we've seen on some of the environmental issues in this industry an embrace for sustainability and social consciousness that sets cannabis apart from many other sectors of the economy. And on this issue of inclusion, we see also a breadth of both participation and discussion about what diversity means and looks like in this industry that we think will be really important to monitor as this industry evolves, because this is going to be fundamental to the final form of this industry once it reaches its maturity. So we're very excited to share with you the findings of this first study, and tremendously excited to continue to explore this issue in the years to come.
Thank you so much, John. Now we're going to dive into the report with John leading the way. Just please remember, while he is going through his findings, if you have any questions, please enter them into the GoToWebinar control panel. John?
Thank you, Gretchen. So just as initial pretext before we get into the data itself, we covered a lot of different questions in this study. We've learned a lot. And so this will be a high level and actually quite fast review of some of the findings that we found most compelling, because I do want to make sure that we reserve enough time for robust discussion, for robust Q&A. So with that said, to get us started, a few points about the survey itself. We had just over 1,700 participants. The survey fielded began in August and we finished in early September, and was an online survey. The survey was distributed predominantly between Women Grow and New Frontier's contact directories, databases, as well as via social media. And because of that, there's a couple of important limitations that we need to acknowledge here, as is important in any good research practice. One is that this is not the census. So there are some limitations to the generalizability of these results, and we will discuss those as we go through the findings. But that does not diminish how powerful and compelling these results are, because it is the first study of its kind to be done with this audience. Second, there's some variability in some of these results because the markets in the US are different stages of implementation. Comparing a 20-year market like California with a brand new market like New York means that the participants in those two markets are likely having very different experiences, and that makes harmonizing those views, or it creates kind of some challenge in harmonizing those views. That said, this is a broad national-based view. And then third, and Giada mentioned this, but I think it is worth underscoring, is that we were very narrow in our definition of diversity in this study. We looked principally at race and ethnicity, or race and gender, but that was, and we did not address things like disability, religious diversity, sexual orientation, all issues that are actually very important and which we intend to explore in future reports. So who did we have participate in the study? About half the participants, 50%, were currently involved in the cannabis industry. The other half were interested in joining the industry, but not yet actively participating in it. And critically, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of our respondents were women. We had 87% of our respondents being female, about 12% being male. That's really important because I want to orient us to the framing that from here on out, the voices you're hearing in these data, the voices of, by and large, women who are current active participants in the legal cannabis industry. So we were really excited when the results came back in, because not only did we have representation from of participants from every U.S. state that has an active cannabis market, the distribution was actually very good across these markets. As one would expect, California accounted for the largest proportion of participants, accounting for about 35% of the total. And then Colorado was our second largest state at 13%. But if you look at the states that are west, they're in green. You have Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada. Those are the states where the cannabis industry is most active, and therefore it makes sense that that's where you would see 68% of our respondents. Comparing the respondents who are currently in the industry versus those who are not in the industry by age, we actually saw that you had a higher proportion of younger participants, of younger respondents who are currently in the industry. And we think that's just a general kind of statement about the cannabis industry, in that, you know, if we think about who cannabis consumers are, they generally tend to skew young. If we think about who tends to support legalization at the highest levels, those also tend to be, or support tends to be significantly higher amongst millennials than it is amongst boomers and the silver generation. And so it's not surprising that you would see greater participation amongst and greater involvement in the industry amongst a younger group of stakeholders. Who are these people and where do they sit in the industry? Again, another kind of exciting thing about these findings, 49%, half of our respondents were business owners. That's a really important point because it tells us that the views we're seeing expressed here are amongst people who are running the organizations. 49% were business owners. You had another 20% who were in senior management roles. This isn't low-level line staff who participated. These are indeed senior managers. And so what we're seeing are the views of the vanguard of the industry. We also had a wonderful diversity of roles and responsibilities. We had people who, the two largest sectors represented were cultivation and marketing. But what you're seeing is just the top 15 of actually a much longer list of roles and functions representing, ranging from retail and distribution through extraction, patient caregivers, healthcare, advocacy, finance, and human resources. Why I stress this point is because the views we're going to be exploring here are from people who are literally sitting in virtually every function of the industry. This wasn't just growers. This wasn't just retailers. And I think that then makes these more meaningful because we do have a very strong cross-section of the industry represented in this study. So we asked respondents how much revenue the companies make. And for a young nascent industry, it's not surprising that you had 46% say that rated less than $100,000. This is startup country, and as a result, you've got companies that are small and operating lean. But that said, there are some big players here. 15% are in companies who made over $1 million in 2016, and 7% are in companies which made over $5 million in 2016. And we would expect that as the industry matures, when we do this again, we would see a shift from the lower end of this scale to some of the higher revenue numbers over time. So we know that we have a strong representation here of owners and senior managers. We know that the majority are in smaller companies. But really interesting to us that not only are these people, our respondents, stakeholders in terms of being employed by or owning these businesses, but they're also investing in the industry. And this is an interesting and important point to understand about the cannabis industry. It is that with 40% of our respondents also investing in the cannabis industry, you have a higher level of commitment to the success of the industry, because not only are the stakeholders working in the space, but they're also investing to advance the space. And we think this is one of the reasons why, when you look at the cannabis industry, the types of people who come here are deeply motivated, exceptionally passionate, and are willing to put up with all of the challenges that come with being in cannabis, from the federal regulations, the complex state regulatory requirements, the lack of access to banking. It's not an easy space to do business in. But that passion and that sense of commitment and investment is why so many in this industry are so deeply committed to the space. And primarily women at that too. And actually that's a really important point, because we didn't show it here in the interest of time, but we actually also found that not only have 40% invested in the industry, but of those who've invested in the industry, 56% of them have invested in female-owned companies. So it's women investing in other women to support their collective success. So what does diversity look like in this industry? And again, I'll reiterate, amongst our respondents. 57% said half or more of their ownership is made up of women. 58% said half or more of their senior management is made up of women. And 63% said the majority of the employees in their company are women. This is really striking in that you have women-owned companies that are being managed by women and who are staffing women. And these are numbers that are significantly higher than we've seen in other sectors of the economy. I hate to use the pun, but it seems apropos about cannabis not having a glass ceiling, or not having a glass ceiling. And therefore, the barriers to growth and professional development that you see in so many other sectors just aren't in cannabis because it's such a nascent environment. And that's been one of the reasons why there's been so many women who've come in and gotten involved. But looking at it from a racial diversity perspective, we actually see much lower levels of both ownership and leadership. In that, compared to the over 57% who said women are the majority owners, only 36% said minorities are in ownership roles, or make up more than half of those in ownership roles. And 35% said more than half make up folks in management roles. So quite a discrepancy there, and that's something that we will be exploring through the course of this conversation. So in this next section, we're going to look at the business case for diversity. And I'll begin by some really interesting findings done by McKinsey & Company, McKinsey & Company being the world's leading management consulting firm. They found that companies who were at the top tier of racial and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to outperform other companies in their space. And companies that were gender diverse were 15% more likely to outperform companies in their sectors. That makes diversity not just a social issue, it makes it a business imperative. Having a gender, socially, socioeconomically diverse workforce actually improves the performance of your company. And so we don't want to view this through the prism of this being a social imperative only, but rather one which actually improves the performance of the industry because it's one that results in better outcomes. And this is a view that's actually shared by respondents in the industry. So we asked our survey respondents whether they thought that having a diverse workplace improves overall efficiency, and 71% agreed. And so, this isn't just an academic exercise, it's one that stakeholders in the industry acutely understand. And taking that a step further, our respondents believed that there should be a greater focus on diversity in the industry. 3/4, 74% said businesses should set diversity targets and work to achieve them. 62% said that state governments, as they're going through the licensing process, should take steps to try and optimize the level of diversity in the license applicants. However, despite that aspiration, there was a recognition that it is more difficult for minority groups to participate in the legal cannabis industry, a view shared by 62% of the respondents. And only 48% felt that legalization will create equal opportunities for everyone to participate in the industry, suggesting that the majority still think that there are going to be structural barriers, even under the umbrella of full legalization, that if not addressed, could limit the extent to which this industry could become truly diverse. So despite the consensus that diversity makes businesses better, that businesses should be doing more, there's also a view that there are challenges that may be impeding progress to those goals. 58% said limited knowledge about how to do this, how to go about building a diverse workforce. Maybe one of the reasons why businesses are not meeting their diversity objectives. A similar number also felt that just the companies that are not committed to this issue and as a result aren't seeing diverse outcomes. More than half, 55%, felt that it was just a lack of awareness. If this isn't an issue that's kind of in your social circles, in your professional circles, it's just not on your radar, so you don't think about it. And so these are some of the just top 3 issues that may be impeding progress. And we hope through studies like this, it sparks a conversation that helps businesses and key industry decision makers to think more creatively about where diversity might sit within their strategic objectives. So as we think about why, who works in cannabis and what a diverse cannabis workforce means, it's critical to understand why people enter the industry. And to us, this was one of the really surprising findings coming out of this study. At least it was to me. 75% said that the ability to create change was a key driver for them entering this industry. Compare that to only 49% who said the opportunity to create wealth. People coming into this industry, by and large, aren't being motivated by money. Yes, becoming insanely wealthy, I assume, would be a welcome outcome to the people who are in it. But it's not a driving force. And so, as employers, as investors are looking at who the pool of applicants are, who the stakeholders in this industry are, it's really important to understand that it's not just purely about the capital side of this. It's change, it's empowerment, it's the ability to be themselves that is drawing people into the industry and is reflecting one of the reasons, and it's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a let's call it eclectic diversity of people coming into the space. Additionally, and underscoring the point that money is not a motivator, 60% either took equal pay or took a pay cut to come into the cannabis industry. Now, if you think about that, the majority of people, when leaving one job to go into another, an increase in pay is generally the biggest reason why they're making that change. Sure, better balance, more work-life, or better benefits, greater work-life stability are motivators. But generally, pay is the big issue that leads people to change jobs, as also to leave one industry for another. But that's not what has brought the majority into cannabis. They've been willing to take a lateral or a deep pay cut in some cases. 35% took a pay cut. It's not the money that's motivating a significant proportion of this industry, and it's really important that employers and investors, industry stakeholders understand that. And just a final riff on that point. Not only did many employees in cannabis give up pay, but they also gave up benefits. 48% of the companies surveyed said they do not offer any of the benefits that we asked about. 45% offer paid vacation, 42% offer sick days. But the numbers get pretty small beyond that. Again, a lot of people have left comfortable jobs, secure benefits to come into this space, and that represents a powerful element of passion and drive that can be harnessed to catalyze the growth of this industry. So not only did they take pay cuts in benefits, but they also are working really long hours. 43% are working more than 40 hours a week in cannabis, and 67% are working more than 40 hours a week in all of their jobs. We were struck how many people are working in cannabis and in jobs outside cannabis simultaneously. But it's not that surprising when you think that nearly half of our respondents were in companies that made less than $100,000 a year. It's not surprising that you would have people moonlighting, running second jobs to help make ends meet while the companies they're building gain traction and get off the ground. But this is a hard-working and very committed workforce, and that represents very significant opportunities to harness that drive. And we can't talk about this being a cannabis employee or stakeholder survey without actually talking a bit about cannabis consumption habits. It should come as no surprise that employees in the cannabis industry consume cannabis. Amongst our respondents, 85% were consumers, which is a significantly higher number than the national average. The national average is just over 50% who have consumed cannabis in their lifetime. But also striking is not only that they're cannabis consumers, but they also consume cannabis more frequently. So in this case, we had 85% who said that they consume cannabis at least once a week. And that's significantly higher than it's nearly actually 10 times higher than the national average for weekly consumption. So they're working hard, but there are benefits to being in the industry, and that's, I think, one of them is the ability to consume cannabis without fear of sanction. So we can't talk about diversity without at least looking at sexual harassment and discrimination. And we began to explore this issue first by framing gender discrimination, racial discrimination, amongst some other issues that the stakeholders in the industry experience, including lack of mentors, low salary and benefits, and lack of career advancement opportunities. And interestingly, amongst the 5 questions or the 5 themes that we were exploring, lack of mentors and low salaries and benefits were perceived to be greater issues than gender discrimination or racial discrimination. About 60% both selected mentors and for low benefits or low salaries, whereas only 50% selected gender discrimination and 45% selected racial discrimination. That is not to suggest that gender discrimination, racial discrimination are not issues, but perhaps it is just worth recognizing that they are not the most important issues as stakeholders evaluate what's happening in their space. And to be clear, sexual harassment is an issue in cannabis. It's not pervasive. 27% said that witnessed it, 18% said they personally experienced it, and 33% said they knew somebody personally who had experienced it. It's happening to about 1 in 5 people in the 1 in 5 people in the industry, and people are aware. They see it happening around them, and that's particularly worth noting because these are women. These are largely women, and these are largely women who are working for women-owned organizations. So even in those environments in the industry, it is happening. And it's important to acknowledge that, particularly in light of the current national discussion, it is critical that this issue be addressed in a meaningful way. And even amongst what is largely a female-owned respondent base, there is still a perception that there's a gender pay gap, that men are making more money than women. So 52% say cannabis is about the same, the pay gap in cannabis is about the same as in other industries. But 16% say it's actually larger. So whether this is certainly one of the issues that we intend to explore in greater detail in subsequent studies. But for all of the greenfield that cannabis represents, clearly there's some business practices from other industries that may be manifesting themselves in cannabis. And a final point here about gender and racial discrimination. 59% say gender discrimination is about the same or better than in other industries. 49% say racial discrimination is about the same or better than in other sectors. And given where the cannabis industry is right now, there's an opportunity for the industry's stakeholders to define what the future of this space looks And so the industry's tolerance for discrimination, the industry's tolerance for harassment, the practices established now will be cemented as the industry matures. And so I would just offer as a concluding thought before we get into the Q&A that moving forward, the more seriously this issue is taken, the more eagerly cannabis industry investors and business owners embrace diversity as a way to not just improve the social optics of their business, but to materially improve the bottom line of their business. It can create a structural framework which would enable cannabis to be an industry that is a step apart, a step removed from others because of the true embrace of the diversity in the way the industry is structured. So a few closing thoughts, and then we'll begin the Q&A. One is that diversity matters, and it matters because it can materially impact the bottom line. Second, maintaining diversity is actually could potentially become more challenging as the industry matures, particularly when we think about who is now coming into the industry and the practices that they're bringing from the sectors that they represent. That will be an important point that we can discuss in the questions. Third, diversity, thinking about diversity in the literal sense of the word, embracing the passion, the drive, the motivation that is leading people to leave secure, comfortable jobs to come into cannabis is a tremendous opportunity for employers and for investors because people are willing to sacrifice a lot to pursue their passion for this space. Additionally, this is not going to be done. The diversity goals that the industry might want to achieve will not be achieved if done in a half-hearted manner. There has to be strategic planning and proactive orientation to this issue if these goals are going to be achieved. And finally, the industry is still very, very young and the rules have not been written. Cannabis has an opportunity to define its future, and we look forward to and hope to see a future in which diversity in cannabis is truly and richly embraced.
All right, thank you so much, John. We will now head into our Q&A portion of this webinar, and we will take as many questions as time permits. Please remember that you can send in your questions at any time using your GoToWebinar control panel, and try to keep them on point in relation to this report. Now, before we begin, let's get to the results from our poll question. Compared to other industries in which you have worked, is the cannabis industry A, more diverse, B, the same, or C, less diverse? According to you all, 42% of you say less diverse. Then coming in second, we have the same at 32%, and A, more diverse, as 26%. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer that. Now we will go to our first question, which is for Giada. As a minority business owner, and based on your own experiences, were any of the findings in this report surprising to you?
Thank you. Yes, I must say yes. Mind you, I'm someone that in the 90s was in banking, and then in the early 2000s was in government. So I guess I thought that either diversity and women in leadership and sort of sexual harassment were all a matter that was specific to other more male-dominated industries. So I was certainly surprised to see most importantly the numbers around sexual harassment. It was actually quite discouraging. And I would raise the question: is this either A, it truly is an issue and it's getting worse, or B, is it that we're finally more likely to talk about it and bring it to the forefront of discussion? I was recently part of humbly. So I was recently part of Washingtonian's 100 Most Powerful Women event, and they actually asked the same question from the audience. And the question was to women, have you ever experienced sexual harassment, A and B? Did you report it? Over 60% in the room said yes, they had, and over 70% of those had said no, they did not report it. So these are all numbers that are interesting, and it's certainly, I'm very excited to see that we continue to contribute to the discussion because that number was big. The second thing that really did surprise me, on a more positive note, is the number of women-owned and women in executive position in this industry. It's encouraging, it's exciting. I think that we're at a time and a place with an opportunity, as Jen mentioned, of having this sort of no glass ceiling industry, no glass ceiling. And it's encouraging and exciting to see that women have indeed taken that opportunity and are not only starting companies, but are investing in companies. So by women, for women. I love that.
All right, thank you very much, Giada. Our next question is going to go to Gia, and John, you may also be able to help weigh in on this a bit. The question is, what skill gaps exist in the cannabis industry that women can provide? Gia, have you found anything in this with your work with Women Grow?
Sure, absolutely. I'd say pretty much what people are currently doing now is needed in our space. I think many people come and approach this industry as though they need to be a grower or a dispensary owner, not realizing that their current skill sets are needed. So that's a big misconception. We absolutely need those public relations professionals like myself in this space. We need accountants, lawyers, and data analytics. So it's all needed here.
All right, thank you so much, Gia. Our next question is going to go to John. Do you have any data on the few minority companies that you've researched and how many were able to find investment money in the space?
Oh, great question. And this is actually an issue which I alluded to it earlier when I said that there may be some challenges to maintaining the levels of diversity we're even currently seeing, low though they may be. And that's because the cannabis industry, or because cannabis remains federally illegal, a large cross-section of the financial services market of banks and other financial institutions are not willing to participate in this space. This means that in order to raise capital for businesses, and particularly the fact because as the industry has matured, more capital is needed now than has ever been needed to start a cannabis business. People are having to turn to private capital, to private networks to get that money rather than to banks as they would in any other sector of the economy. The challenge with that is that it means that the ability to raise funds is going to be limited increasingly to people who have access to high net worth individuals who can fund the $1 million or $5 million required to get a dispensary up and running. It was one thing when you were in Colorado in 2012 and 13 and you could open a dispensary with a jar of cannabis and $5,000 to your name. But look at a market like Massachusetts, where you have $500,000 minimum capital requirements just to be able to apply for a license. The increase in the capital requirements to get started do end up having a disproportionately negative effect on poor and minority communities. And one of our concerns as we watch that trend is that as the cost of business becomes higher, it becomes even more exclusionary because there is no access to traditional banking, and it is therefore only people who have access to networks of people with deep capital reserves that will be able to participate in the space.
All right, thank you, John. We have a number of questions coming in about women entering the space, specifically as minorities. So I'm going to throw that over to you, Giada, as a woman who is a minority and started a business. What type of resources are out there for women entrepreneurs trying to enter the space as minorities?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I'm afraid I don't have a super encouraging answer for. This is my fourth company, and I have always been a woman and a minority. I've tried it all, to be honest. I've tried this SBA, I've tried grants, I've done the incubator thing, and I think incubators and accelerators are probably good ways to go. But at the end of the day, to be candid with all of you, my investors have tended to be males from venture capital funds, and that's the truth. I would say that moving forward, however, there are funds around the United States and globally that are led by women that are starting to have a material impact in us, in our ability to sort of, stand up businesses. One of them is Golden Seed, probably one of the largest ones. Another one is Elevate, based out of New York, also very large and very prolific. And mind you, there are also women in the cannabis industry today that may not be advertising it, but are powerful women, experienced women that are all about giving back, and they are invested. And I'm very happy to say today, finally, with New Frontier Data, I do have women and minority investors, which is very refreshing. All of that said, it hasn't gotten easier. There's just a little bit more to support us. But the fundraising journey continues to be a knocking on doors and sort of hit the pavement hard to sort of get this initiative. If any of you would like to reach out to me independently to give you sort of some names of organizations, a more comprehensive list of organizations out there, I'm happy to. But again, I think that we don't get a pass for being women and minorities. We just have to work it hard as everyone else, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, Giada.
Do you mind if I add to that a little bit, because I couldn't agree with you more? And this is just from a Women Grow perspective, because we get that question as well. And we agree with everything Giada said, because we do experience that as well, not only just from a Women Grow perspective, but also our members. And I absolutely agree. I believe that we're going to see more opportunities coming versus what we saw before. So those that are discouraged, I would encourage you to keep hope and to realize that the more interest that and the more awareness around the cannabis industry that's arising, I think you're going to begin to see more investors that want to support women and women-owned businesses.
Great. All right, thank you for that, Gia. My next question here goes to John. How are restrictive state regulations affecting minorities' entrance into the industry?
Good question. The restrictive regulations are having a couple of important impacts. And perhaps one really good example is a state like New York. They only issued 5 cannabis business licenses, and each of those people who got a license would be able to run then a grow operation as well as a number of dispensaries. The issue with running such a constrictive and constricted licensing approach means that you end up having this escalating kind of cost of application, because everyone who wants a license, or because the licenses become so valuable that you have people literally investing millions of dollars in order to go through the license application process. That just automatically becomes exclusionary for underserved and poor communities, because the ability to compete against a hedge fund manager in New York who's got $300 million in liquid assets, as somebody who has a steady paycheck job that's looking to get involved, it becomes much, much more challenging. And so we actually expect, and California may be an interesting example of this, in environments where you've had low barriers to participation and unlimited licensing, you do tend to see much greater participation, because it's easier for people who may not necessarily have deep pockets, but they've got either some technical aptitude, they have a specific skill set, they're really good baker and they know how to make good edibles in their kitchen, and they can run a small edibles company that grows from there. Reducing those barriers to participation are an important way to accelerating and amplifying the diversity in the space. And unfortunately, in the limited license environments, that's just not the case.
All right, thank you, John. Our next question is to Giada. We've seen that sexual harassment has been a major concern in recent headlines. And you said today we're about 53% in the cannabis industry have experienced sexual harassment or witnessed it. How does that compare to what we're seeing throughout the rest of the workforce?
Thank you. I alluded this to sort of the question that I'm always surprising to me. For those of you that may not follow the issue, the Washington Post, I think in collaboration with ABC News, did a poll. In 2011, the number was 47% of Americans said they felt that sexual harassment in the workplace was a serious problem. Mind you, today it's 64% compared to 57% in the cannabis industry. So it's as I said, it's certainly troublesome and cause for concern. I'm hoping that the silver lining of that is that women and men, because sexual harassment, mind you, is not just for women, men do get sexually harassed as well, that we're all becoming encouraged and sort of, have the strength and courage to come forward and talk about it. Because if we don't acknowledge the problem, then we'll never come up with a solution. I'll leave it at that. But it seems that this is now a national, it's now global, and certainly industry-wide issue, and including one in our own backyard in the cannabis industry.
All right, thank you, Giada. John, do you have something to add?
I do, and because I've been reflecting a lot on this issue lately, I'll say this, and this might be a slightly personal statement, but I think it is an important one. As somebody who works in a female-led company who has the pleasure of working with some extraordinarily capable and qualified female staff, I think one of the things that the men in this industry have to also take accountability and ownership for is to call it out when we see it. I think one of the reasons why this has become such an issue in the rest of the economy is that there's been a silent, disapproving majority who have watched it happen but said nothing. Finally, we're starting to see, and recently in the news, we have seen the shift in the discussion happening because more people are coming out and willing to speak out on it. And I think in cannabis, because it is such a young industry, I think it is there's a time now, a moment now, where the industry can robustly nip this in the bud, make it clear that it is a standard that will not be accepted in this space, and use that as a foundation that the industry can grow from.
Gia, do you have any thoughts on sexual harassment in the space?
Yeah, I think much like what Giada and John have both said, I think it's a good thing that we're speaking about it now in the industry's young state, whereas the topic is now just approaching many other industries that have been around and been brushing it under the rug. The fact that we're having these conversations and we're bringing it to light, especially in a report like this, we're now bringing to the attention of companies that are existing where women have raised their hands and said they're experiencing this. And now we can have those conversations, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, and say, let's change this behavior and shift the industry, whereas many other industries are now having to catch up and repair. So the fact that we are bringing this to light now in such a young state, I hope that this now changes the standard within our space.
Thank you, Gia. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to throw out the next two questions to all three of our speakers here. Giada, we'll start with you. Any recommendations on how companies should apply information that was supplied in this report?
Yes, so glad that this came up. And John brought it up when he discussed the McKinsey study. It is truly important as us, CEOs and executives and team leaders, to encourage and substantiate the need for diversity to those that we report to, whether they're board members or whether it is investors. There is, there truly is, we're in a global economy. The cannabis industry is not only thriving in the US and in Canada, it is thriving globally. There are dozens of countries around us in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America that are legalizing. So it is truly a global industry as such. the more diversity we have in our management teams and our teams overall, the more likely we are to not be blindsided by what is happening around us. It truly is a socio-economic factor, not just a social one. So use this information to substantiate the need to go out and ensure that you have a diverse team. Hire and look for that talent that comes from different areas, whether it is political affiliation, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. The more diverse minds you have at the table when you make a decision, the more likely you are to make a better decision in a world that is currently globally connected and an industry that is a part of a global phenomena. That's what I would say.
Gia, what would you tell your members?
Absolutely. Being diverse is good business, period. I think it brings not only diverse cultures to the table, but as well as diverse experiences and perspectives. But, you know, it makes us better as businesses to have an inclusive, not just gender and culture, but also LGBTQ, which we did touch upon in this research. We must start looking at this landscape as inclusive. And I believe that we will be better businesses going forward with these perspectives.
John, what would be your takeaways for people in this data? How do they apply to the industry best?
Start a conversation. You know, I think there's been, again, coming back to the idea that cannabis is a really young industry. Sometimes these are issues that can be difficult or uncomfortable to talk about because of the way in which they've been handled in other sectors. But in cannabis, you have an opportunity to write the book, write the rules for how this gets done. And so whether if you are a business owner, if you're a passionate, driven cannabis industry employee, if you're an investor, have the conversation, but be willing to include this as a perspective as you build the vision of where you want your organizations to go. And by institutionalizing that, not as a cudgel to beat people over the head, but as a topic that will, that could enrich not just the work environment, but enrich your bottom line. But by having the conversation and using this as a guide for that, we hope that, and we believe that this will ultimately result in better outcomes, both for the workforce, for the businesses in the space, and for the industry overall.
All right, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you to all of our panelists. Now, also, a big thank you to our audience for joining us today. As an added bonus for participating in our webinar, you will see on our slides, it says 10%. We're knocking it up to 15%. We know that you need this report, so we're going to give you an extra 5% off. Just use the promo code DiversityWebinar and purchase the report at www.newfrontierdata.com, 2017 Diversity. Now, just a heads up, in the next few weeks, on November 30th, we will have our next webinar looking at investment in the cannabis industry in partnership with Viridian Capital Partners. Please go to the link that you see listed here to sign up for the webinar. Now, if you would like more information about New Frontier Data or Women Grow, please reach out to us. As mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be sent out later this week. Have a great day.